Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have a great tribute this evening to a good friend, Calvin Parker from the Pascagoula incident. Uh, we're going to be talking about him, and then we'll go into other things about with the guests I have tonight. That's Philip Mantle and Dr. Irina Scott. They have published a book. Calvin has written a foreword to it, of course, but it's called Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, and that's about the Pascagoula incident. More witnesses had come forward. It's pretty amazing because a lot of times, people will say to me, "Why do you talk about these old cases?" Well, when the old cases get talked about, a lot of times it means that people are hearing it possibly for the first time, and they said, "Oh yeah, but my uncle said something about that happened then," or whatever. So it's really good. I like rehashing the old cases, especially when they're as incredible as it is. The Pascagoula incident was an amazing one. So yeah, we will miss Calvin. He was such a great guy, and what a great sense of humor. And the blog this week is called "In Memory of Calvin Parker." That's by Charles Lear. He did some research, and it kind of details out the Pascagoula incident, what happened during all that, along with how not just Calvin Parker but Charles Hickson reacted. The story is there. It's on our website, podcastufo.com. Without further ado, we're bringing in our guests, Dr. Irina Scott and Philip Mantle. Welcome.
Yeah, good evening, Martin.
So yes, we're paying tribute to a wonderful man, and we all got to know, and it's really sad. We lost Calvin back on the 24th of August, I believe, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So, Philip, your connection with Calvin, I was a little bit instrumental in that, and I was so happy.
No, you're being far too modest, Martin. You were instrumental, not partially. I mean, I'd been searching for Calvin Parker for about 3 months. I thought, well, obviously I'll start in Mississippi. And I spoke to a few people there, and they had no idea what I was talking about, Martin. They sent me some links that they just Googled it. I could have done that myself. And I said, no, I'm not after information about what happened to him. I'm after the man himself. And I wasn't entirely sure if he was still alive, although I'd not been able to find any information to the latter. But so I put the feelers out, and one of those feelers reached your inbox, Martin, and you said, "Oh, I happened to interview him a few years ago," and you put us in touch. And I remember the first phone call I had with Calvin. He was very nice, very polite, didn't say an awful lot, And what I didn't know, because I had literally rang him for an interview. I'd got the rights to republish Charles Hickson's book that he wrote with William Mendez back in 1983. And I thought, just to bring it up to date, it'd be nice to get an interview with Calvin if I could. And what I didn't know, just a few weeks before I spoke to him, he'd been to a funeral of a friend. And as he's coming out of the place, he wrote, I think it was in like and he wrote his name in the book of condolences. And the people coming behind him saw his name, and then they started wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Calvin didn't like that in the first place. He thought it was bad manners, disrespectful. And of course, his wife, Wynette, she wasn't happy with him because bearing in mind, she'd been with him from the very beginning. And she said to him, "Why don't you write a damn book about this? And everybody will know the story, And he said, "Yes, darling, of course I will. No intention of writing anything, Martin, And then I turned up. And I think it was on the second occasion I spoke to him. He says, "Well, I've started writing a book, Philip." So I then sent him a contract, a sample. And he agreed eventually to do it on one condition, and that was that when he wrote his book, there would be no changes to it. I mean, I wasn't allowed to change a thing. Nor did I want to, because I said to him, the only thing you can control, Calvin, is what you write. You know, he complained rightly about the way the media had treated them and so on and so forth.
Mm.
This is not the media, this is you. So we agreed, and off we went. We published a book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, and much to our amazement, Martin, it took off.
Yeah.
And Calvin was treated with respect. There was nobody laughing this time, unlike previously in 1973, and we became very close. We would speak at least once a week, you know, usually on Skype, with emails in between. And he was due to come to the UK in 2019, but that's when his illness first started. He couldn't make it. And I think even then, you know, looking back, Calvin knew there was something, you know, more serious. And because he kept talking about, we've all got our own expiration date, you know, sell by date. You know, he said that several times.
I think I heard him say that to me as well. He said something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But he was still Calvin. You know, he'd have good days and bad days. He was still funny. You know, still a man of his word. You know, a very honourable man.
Yes.
And of course, Waynette would be in the background, and she join in as well. So we'd have you know, laughter and jokes between the three of us. And you know, he got better for a while. He had treatment and so on, which kind of stabilized him. But then, you know, the cancer was there, and there was no way of getting rid of it. So it wasn't a question of if he would pass. It was just a question of when. Right. We were all hoping he'd make it to this October, you know, for the 50th anniversary, but sadly he didn't. And I spoke to him on the phone the week before he died, because he was no longer able to use Skype or email. And I told him how much respected he was. I told him I loved him, because he reminded me very much of my own brother, who I lost some years ago. Calvin and him had similar characteristics, you know, and the same kind of sense of humor. I remember one year, for example, Calvin sent me some photographs. They'd had a storm, and there was a tree come through the roof on the house. And he says, my next door neighbor will pay for it. So why would your next door neighbor pay for it? I said, well, it's his tree. he said, I've cut all my trees down. So this wouldn't happen. And lo and behold, his next door neighbor did pay for it, you know. And so it was just funny. It was just funny. And it was that, you know, we even laughed when we last spoke, because I said, you're not allowed to die. And he says, why is that? I said, because Waynette's not giving you permission. So as poorly as he was still smiling and laughing, you know. And I said when he died, they wanted a private memorial service. It was only a small place, so Waynette asked me not to say anything until it was over and done with. Yeah. She didn't want strangers turning up. So fair enough. But I sent some flowers, and although I signed it on behalf of myself and my wife, I also added a line that was also from the UFO community around the world, you know. Yeah. Because he had he took so many people, and he didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, he did. He was. I had the opportunity to spend time with him in September. I think it was 2019. It was prior to COVID. The last when he was in Phoenix at the. I got him hooked up to that conference. Well, I should say they reached out to me, and I connected so he could be out there. And I spent several nights out to dinner with Calvin and Waynette. And, you know, and by the way, when he was talking in front of that big audience, he had people in tears. He was so hilarious. Yeah. He was really funny. When he talks about how he would have dated one of the aliens if he saw her in a bar, you know, that type of thing. But anyway, he's a sophisticated man. A lot of people, because I know the Southern accent, but he was quite a man. I mean, he was building infrastructures for airports around the country his company was. I mean, people don't understand that. He wasn't just a simple country boy. He was a very hard worker and did a lot of amazing things.
Absolutely. He might not have had any great formal education, but he was an intelligent man nonetheless.
Right.
And he tried to explain calculus to me. He used calculus. And I had to look it up to remember what the hell it was. I had no idea. And, we laughed about that. And, he could build anything, could fix anything, you know. And he would spend hours. He had a riverboat, and he'd spend hours fiddling with the riverboat. And this will make you laugh. And before I met him, he had open heart surgery. And in his chest, they put this kind of wire mesh to help with the wound and all that kind of thing. So he was with a friend one day working on his houseboat, and he fell in the river. And of course, with this mesh, he went straight down, and there was just his feet sticking out of the water.
My God.
And his friend couldn't do anything but laugh,
Oh, jeez.
Instead of getting hold of his legs and trying to pull him out, all he could do was laugh. And then
that is so funny.
He told me when they were out on the river, him and Waynette fishing, one day they got an alligator jump on the boat. And he said, you don't shoot it, Philip. You just get your rod and you hit it with the butt of your rod and hit it on the nose, and away it goes. He says, but I'll leave all the snakes to Waynette.
So funny.
So he was all right wrestling with an alligator, but he leave the snakes to his wife. I was so funny. And I tried to explain to him, we don't have anything like that here. We don't have anything that. I said, I think the most dangerous thing we have in Britain is a wasp. Wasps and bee stings probably hurt more people every year than any. We don't have anything that will eat you, or poison you. And he just shook his head, But you were right, Martin. He wasn't some simple country bumpkin.
Yeah.
Yes. He might not be sophisticated in his language and things of that nature, but he certainly wasn't stupid by a long shot, not at all.
Right. Now, somewhere he had sent me a picture of that houseboat, and I was just looking for it, and I can't seem to find it, unfortunately. That was a house mansion. That thing was huge.
He kept saying to me, I'm working on my boat, and I'm thinking a little boat, so,
well, he had
a rowboat.
Yeah,
on a little motorboat, and then he sent me a photograph of it, and it was huge. But before he died, Calvin sold his house and his boat and everything. I want to tell you this little story about some really nice people. There's a gentleman that's featured in our book. I'm not going to mention his name. He was a witness to some events. I hadn't heard from him in a while, and he'd met Calvin, and he phoned me up. Completely out of the blue, Martin, and he said, I've heard that Calvin's sold his house and his boat, so I got some, he says, can you tell him for me, I've come into some money, and if he wants his boat back, I'll buy it for him.
Oh my God. And that's something.
I didn't have the heart to tell this guy to begin with that he was dying. Yeah. I told him eventually, but this gentleman just came out of the blue. I haven't spoke to him for 2 or 3 years at least, and I think he met Calvin twice. And he said, I want. That's why he was contacting me, not to find out about Calvin, just to tell Calvin he'd buy his boat back for him if he wanted it.
That's amazing.
And I thought, wow, man, even in the darkest of hours, when people are going to die and something like this happens, it gives you. It was very, I felt moved by it, and it wasn't me that was offering this, It shows you what good people are out there. It really does.
Yes, and that's such a wonderful story. Now, Dr. Arena Scott, we haven't heard much from you. It's because we've been doing all the talking. Were you able to actually meet up with Calvin?
No, I had spoken to him before, but I hadn't met him.
But you are instrumental in doing a lot of the work on this latest book. But you spoke to him on the phone or Skype or whatever.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how close you were to him, how you had connected with him, how all that was, or you were basically doing more of the research part of the aspect of the latest book that came out and others.
Yeah, I was interviewing the other witnesses and the people that were affected by it.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I want to talk all about that as well. So Philip, as we move on without Calvin, I do remember that he had told me that there was some movie rights. Do you think that will ever come about?
Well, I can't say anything, but all I can say is that we did have a producer stroke director interested.
Uh-huh.
And the only reason, I'm not going to mention his name, but the gentleman himself knows the UFO subject inside out. He had his own encounter as a young man. And I thought, when we're speaking to him, when he said that, I thought, bingo, we're in.
Yeah.
The only thing was he was finishing a project then with a well-known, I won't give anything, a well-known Hollywood actor, So he just didn't have the time, but he kept in touch. And I let him know that Calvin had passed away. And he said, as soon as the Hollywood writers' strike is over with, he now has the time, and hopefully something will come of it. I won't say any more than that because there's nothing confirmed, but it looks like the Hollywood writers' strike has freed up his time, so to speak, and every now and again when Irene and I have been doing something or we've located something, I send out some little email lists. I've always kept this gentleman informed, so he knew that the case wasn't dead. It's been ever evolving, and we have a full-length feature film script written by two professional writers, not by UFO researchers. We also have a 4-part drama series written, again by a professional. So both options are available, and we'll have to wait and see. That's all I can say. Once the writers' strike is over, then I think we might start talking, and hopefully, we'll get the green light. But you never know. You never know.
I've always listed this case as what I consider one of the the top 5, and one of the reasons that makes this case so credible, in my opinion, was the hidden recording that was being done in the police station. Now, one of the things that I often do here, well, a couple of things while I'm in the midst of this. First of all, this is pre-recorded because Philip is in London, England, I mean. And secondly, that what I often forget is that there are a lot of new people right now that are listening to this show and listening and paying attention to the UFO topic that have never done that before. So they have no clue of what we're talking about. So I'd like to go. I don't know if either one of you, Irina, if you want to go into the incident or Philip, but I really think that we should do some type of a nutshell for the person who's hearing about this for the very first time.
Yeah, well, Calvin actually lived near Laurel in Mississippi, which was about 200 miles away from Pascagoula. He just got engaged to Waynette, and he got his life planned, getting married in November, got a new car, gonna get a house, children, grandchildren, But Waynette said, look, you're working all the hours God sends. What, can't you get a 9-to-5 job so I can see more of you? So it was Calvin's father said, why don't you ring Charlie Hickson? He's a foreman in the shipyards. He might be able to get you a job. So Calvin did. Charlie said, yeah, we've got a vacancy, no problem. Got him a job. So the idea was that Calvin would stay with Charlie Monday to Friday, pay him some board and lodgings. That photograph is actually in the shipyard. So October the 11th, 1973 was Calvin's first day at work in the shipyard as a welder. He liked working hard. He liked manual work. He liked using his hands. He was almost 19, Charlie 42. they're driving home that night. Calvin's driving, brand new car. And one thing that both gentlemen enjoyed was fishing. So Charlie said, "Do you want a bit of fishing tonight, son?" "Oh, yeah, great." They get some tackle from Charlie's, buy some bait. And Charlie's directing Calvin where to go because he doesn't know the location. And they head down by the river. And on the way in, they pass a no entry sign. Calvin remarks on that, and Charlie says, don't worry about it. They park up, they start fishing. In the first spot, they're bitten to death by insects, so they move to an old pier at the Shaw Peter shipyard that's long since been closed. Fishing away, and then Calvin said that these blue lights came from behind them, and it went out across the water, and he thought, we shouldn't have ignored that no entry sign. We're going to get arrested, for trespassing, So they turn around almost simultaneously, and of course it's not the police. There's this football-shaped object we call a rugby ball shape descending, 2 lights on one end. It stopped a couple of feet above the ground. The light from it was dazzling, and this opening appeared, and the light was even more intense. They had to shield their eyes. These 3 humanoid creatures literally floated out of this thing, didn't walk or run across the ground. 2 got hold of Charlie, 1 got hold of Calvin, and as scared as they were, they felt instant relaxed. And they were taken towards this thing. As they went through the opening, Charlie to the right, Calvin to the left, and they were examined. This thing came down from the ceiling, went around Calvin. A similar thing happened to Charlie. But these big, ugly creatures, as Calvin described them, they were about 5 feet tall, thick neck, pointed protrusions out the side and one out the front. There it is. Long arms with like pincer-like appendages. The legs didn't move at all, were stuck together. The one stood next to him, and then he felt this presence from behind Martin. And for some reason, he thought, it's a woman. And this other creature appeared, and she was pretty much, like you said, was female. Apart from the middle fingers were a bit longer. And she pushed Calvin's jaw down and put the finger up inside him. They took his lower clothing off, shoes and socks. They says, they stuck something in my foot and it hurt. And it was he felt almost as if his blood was being drained out of him and replaced with something else. At some point, Calvin managed to regain his composure, and he could move, and he got hold of this female and banged her head against the wall, at which point she pointed to the ugly creature, got hold of Calvin, back out onto the pier, and the next thing he remembers is Charlie shouting at him, "Are you all right? Are you all right? You all right, son?" They turn around, this thing disappears into the sky, and he's gone. Now, to begin with, they weren't going to tell anyone, because Calvin's about to get married. He thought, my fiance's father won't let me marry her. Everything, am I right in that case? So they set off home, but it was Charlie that had a change of heart. And he said, what if these things come back and do this to somebody else? What if it's an invasion? Bear in mind, Charlie had served in the army and fought in Korea. So Calvin said, okay, on one condition. I'll say everything. I'll admit to everything apart from when we go on board. So when these creatures come out of this thing, I'm going to say I passed out and can't remember anything. But that wasn't true. And they agreed. They phoned Keesler Air Force Base. They said, we're not interested. We're not in the UFO business. Ring the police. So they rang the police. They sent a squad car out, gave them a sobriety test, and then escorted them into town. They were interviewed separately at Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Then they were both put in a room, and the deputy he fiddled with something in the desk next to him. And he said, I'm just going to get some coffee, guys. I'll be back in a minute. And then a few minutes later, he comes back, opens the drawer again, takes something out. They had no idea what he was doing. And, of course, it was a recording. And Sheriff Fred Diamond and the deputies thought, we'll have them now, we've got this secret tape. And, of course, on the tape, when they played it back, they weren't laughing and joking. Calvin is crawling up the wall, and they're talking about what had happened to them. They were mesmerized by everything, but they were talking about this opening. You see that opening, son? How did that happen? So the law enforcement changed their attitude with them to believe in them, that something had really terrified these two fellas, and off they went home. The sheriff said, we won't say anything, we're not a word. The following morning, they got up to go to work. As soon as they get there, they're summoned to the boss's office, and he said, what the hell have you two been up to? The phones won't stop ringing. We've got journalists outside. Somehow the story had got out. They were then shipped off to the Singing River Hospital for an examination, which they passed okay. And then, rather ironic, they were taken to Keesler Air Force Base to be checked for radiation. Bearing in mind, the first place they phoned that night was Keesler. And they said, politely, but, get lost. So they were checked for radiation, which was 0, but the officers in charge said, come on, gents, while you're here, why don't you tell us what's happened? And they did. And of course, the secret tape later came out, so we have a transcript of that in the new book. At Keesler Air Force Base, there was no tape recording. It was a stenographer that recorded it. And we have that full transcript in the book, unredacted. So all the officers are there, named. Everybody who was there was named. And the story, literally went worldwide. The following day, Dr. James Harder and Dr. J. Allen Hynek appeared on scene. And after speaking with the gentleman, after listening to the secret tape, Hynek held a press conference and said these two guys are genuine. So they had an experience, period. Eventually, Calvin disappeared off back home because he didn't want anything to do with the media. He ended up in hospital. Finally got married, and but the trauma stayed with him for the rest of his life. Martin, he hated the fact that Charlie was the opposite. Charlie would appear on talk shows and conferences. Calvin didn't want him to say anything. That damn fool stopped talking. Occasionally, Calvin would crop up, but that was usually at Charlie's insistence. And that is the story up until 2018. That was what we had, and that's them. Photographed back in 1973, and that's it for those. That's it in a nutshell. It's larger than that, but that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that I don't know how many other witnesses there were, but Irina, why don't we talk about the witnesses and your work in that?
Well, surprisingly enough, there were witnesses immediately on that day, that night. The person in the sheriff's office that was taking phone calls said that there had been around 50 calls from people reporting UFOs that night at the same time, and other people in the sheriff's office also reporting. So there were a lot of people that saw something at the same time as the abduction, which is really odd for an abduction. Usually abductions are things that happen out in the boondocks where nobody knows anything, and there's one witness and things. In this case, there's two, and a number of people had seen an object that was strange enough that they reported it. And unfortunately, those documents are, the Hurricane Katrina took them, but we're just now finding other people that have seen something, and we have to dig to find these people. They didn't just float up and start telling us for the main part. One of the first ones was Maria and Jerry Blair, and we didn't find them. They, in a way, found us. There had been a recording of Calvin on YouTube, and somebody had written in and said, "Oh yeah, my parents saw that." And so Philip got in contact with them and found out her parents' names and things, and gave me the names of the parents to call. And so this was the first person I called. Um, and I talked, first of all, to the husband, and he said something about he heard a big splash. And then he said something about a blimp. And then he gave the phone to his wife, Marie. And he was supposed to be a skeptic at that time and didn't want to talk about it. Well, Marie started talking about it. And what she said was that they were at the land end of a pier, and the husband was going out with his supervisor on a boat to supply oil rigs or whatever. And so they were the supervisor was late. So they were just in the car waiting. She said that the husband went to sleep. She looked out over the Pascagoula River. They were on the opposite side of the river than Calvin and Charlie. And she said she saw this airplane. It was lit kind of funny, and it wasn't going anywhere. She said the pilot must be lost, so just going around and around and around, but didn't go anyplace. And she thought this was very, very strange because it should go someplace and go over and go wherever it's going or something. This just sort of like it was lost or looking for something. So she watched that for a while. Then her husband decided to take his clothes to the boat. It was about 9 o'clock, apparently. He walked out first along the pier, and she was following him. And she said, as they were walking out there, that something came out of the water that looked just like a man and flopped up on the pier right in front of her. And I could tell just immediately that she was very, very, very emotional about it. So then she kept saying that it went back down, but it didn't come back for air, and she couldn't understand why it didn't come back up for air. So they walked down to the boat, and then another strange thing was she didn't get back until 12 o'clock, midnight, and came back and walked. She said she was just really, really scared. So she ran down the pier and jumped in the car and left. Well, I had questions because, for one thing, she was just really emotional about this thing that jumped up on the pier, but she didn't have any information about it. And you could just tell she was wrought up about it. And also I wondered what they were doing on the boat for 3 hours, which sounds kind of boring, sitting on a boat for 3 hours. But anyway, so we talked for about 2 years back and forth. And I could sense, she thought maybe something else happened, but she didn't know what it was. And her husband was a skeptic, so she couldn't discuss anything with him. Well, eventually, unfortunately, her husband got sick and then he died. And just, he had been a skeptic all this time. So just before he went on a ventilator, he told her that they had been abducted. And this was news to her. She'd had this feeling that something was going on, but she didn't know what it was. And so he told her that they'd been abducted, and in the object, and he remembered the beings or whatever they were, and remembered kind of in detail, which if it was my husband, I would, first of all, wonder if he was telling the truth or just appeasing me or something. But she seemed to totally believe him, and she knew him, so I'm sure he was telling the truth. But she was unhappy because that would be really, really scary, because he seemed to have he had some communication with these things beforehand, and he was trying to protect her apparently and not tell her. So that was one reason why he was acting as a skeptic. And then eventually she underwent hypnosis, and also remembered a little more. I don't know if she ever remembered being inside the object, but she remembered seeing it closely. And she had a lot of information from her husband. For example, he referred to one of the beings as a doctor. And she didn't know exactly why he did that, but she thought there was some kind of a conflict, or maybe the thing had really examined him a lot more than he wanted to talk about or something. And after their reported abduction, he saw the beings swimming back toward the pier where Calvin and Charlie were. I mean, they didn't know then that, they were there. They just knew somebody was there. Something was going on. But so maybe that's why she saw this thing flop up. She said that apparently when it flopped up, what she didn't remember is that it sort of got control of her mind then, and just controlled her mind and then left. And that was really why she was so emotional, but she didn't know that then.
Gee.
We talked about it for 2 years, and she was trying to figure out why she was so emotional, and that apparently was why.
What is interesting, Martin, and I viewed it again today, and we'll comment on here, is that Mr. Blair was in hospital, and it was on the eve of him having an operation, and weren't sure if he was going to survive. And he insisted on speaking to me on the mobile phone and telling me.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'd spoken to them briefly before putting them in touch with Irina, and he said, I lied, Philip. I lied. I did see it, and I did see the creatures, And not only that, he made his wife Maria film it, and he's literally sat on his hospital bed. He's got no top on, so he's still got the electrode sticking to his chest. It looks like he's had an ECG or something of that. So I know it was a bit protracted with him speaking to his wife Maria, and then Maria to Irina, but it was almost like a deathbed confession. But it wasn't an instantaneous one. It carried on for a period of time. And what Maria the conclusion she came to in the end, that whatever was going on that night, it was meant for her and her husband, and that Charlie and Calvin were like collateral damage, so to speak, because Maria and her husband were to be there that night. It was something planned. He was going out on a boat, whereas Charlie and Calvin had no plans. They just talked about this on the way home from work that night, Yeah. So whether she's right or wrong, it doesn't really make any difference, but that's the way she tries to evaluate it, that whatever was happening was meant for them and not Charlie and Calvin. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, And make of it what you will. I mean, Irina spoke to them a lot more than I did. We have a brief video clip of Maria talking about this, and we have it on audio as well. And we filmed the hypnosis. So the hypnosis is both audio and video, and it's professionally filmed. And none of us expected this, Martin, And she met Calvin, they became friends.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, none of us expected anything like this,
Right.
And that's just the beginning of it. It really is.
Well, this is really quite an amazing part that I was unaware of. And if you really think about it, if Calvin and Charlie did not go to the police station that night, we would have never heard about this incident.
Similarly, with Mr. and Mrs. Blair, it was the comment on YouTube. Calvin had made this little 8-minute news item, and somebody put it on YouTube, and there was loads of comments, and there was just one comment, and it said, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night, and they too saw the UFO. But then this person added, but they weren't abducted. And it turned out that this young lady was actually Maria and Jerry's youngest daughter. They have 2 daughters. So even their daughters didn't know about what had happened. They knew they'd seen the lights and things like that, but that was it.
Yeah.
And again, had she not made that little comment, had I not seen it, we would never have known about them. Because people say, oh, these people want their 15 minutes of fame. That's why they're coming forward. Well, they didn't come forward. It was just a little thing that their daughter wrote that I happened to see and follow up on. And I learned a valuable lesson doing so, was to always try and follow up on things like that.
And I agree.
Yeah, Irene spoke to them, texted them, we kept in constant touch, and still are. We're still in touch with Maria today.
I remember Kevin Day, who's known, for, the Tic Tac incident, 2004, off of the Pacific out by Catalina Island out there. He commented on something I did with Robert Powell about the Tic Tac incident, and so that's how someone connected to. He said, "Yeah, I was there," and you think at first, yeah, whatever, but they followed the lead. Robert Powell followed the lead, and Kevin Day has spoken a lot about that situation. It is amazing how that connection can happen, and one thing I've mentioned about this. I don't know if I've mentioned it on this show or just to people, but after first of all, I should just say my part in the whole thing, how it all happened, that I connected with Calvin was, and to give credit where it's due, is Michael Lauk was writing blogs for me, and he wrote, since that time, my UFO website was hacked. I lost 1,500 pages, but it was a really nice blog about the Pascagoula incident. And it was nice enough well written, that Calvin actually contacted me. I got an email saying, that was very accurate and very well done on the Pascagoula incident, signed at the bottom, Calvin Parker. So I said, is this the Calvin Parker? And he said, yes. And I said, how would you feel about coming on a show? I know you haven't been on a show for years, and how would you feel about it? And we talked on the phone, and eventually I convinced him, and I did a phone interview at the time with him. And it was wonderful, real fine gentleman. That's why I always felt about Calvin. But so what happened, and you may know this story, Philip, I'm not sure, but what had happened was, it was quite some time after I got a email from someone that said, hey, can I please have Calvin's contact information? I never send anyone's contact information, but what I do is I'll forward an email to that person. Well, it ended up being an estranged daughter, and they got together and had a wonderful time. Unfortunately, she passed away, but when I was out in Phoenix, Calvin was telling me about how much that meant in his life to get his daughter back into his life for the short time that, she was there. So that made me feel, that was worth doing the podcast right there alone.
Yeah, that was Calvin for you. And he actually enjoyed speaking at the conferences in the end, not because he was the center of attraction. He just loved meeting the people. He was a people person.
Oh, yeah.
And he got a taste of it, and he wanted to do more. And of course, the illness kicked in, and he couldn't travel. So, we're fortunate. Dr. Scott and I have been consultants on a new documentary with a UK company, and that's all done. It's been edited as we speak, and we're hoping. I've seen the trailer for it, and if the documentary is as good as this trailer, I'll be very happy. Hopefully that'll be out by the end of the year. We have no control over that, of course.
Yeah.
And Calvin's in it, of course, and Waynette. And like the thing with Mr. and Mrs. Blair, every word of that is in the book. The transcript of the hypnosis is in the book. I know it's a contentious subject, but Mrs. Blair wanted the hypnosis, not us. So we were able to facilitate that last year, film it, transcribe it. It's all in the book. Calvin's hypnosis he had last year. Again, we filmed it. It's in the book. Make of it what you will. And as we're accumulating this information, Martin. There was certainly no thoughts between Irina and I of any book. You know, we wrote articles about it, and we thought, we can only write so many articles. This is not going to stop.
Yeah.
It just kept coming. And we did an interview a few weeks back. I'm not sure if Irina was on it, and somebody said to me, how many witnesses are in the book? I thought, I don't know. I haven't counted them, Now, I knew Irina said she's so far spoken to about 30 people. And I think that's fairly close. But there's about 40 witnesses in the book, And that includes the Blairs and a chap called Larry Booth, who was right there in 1973. We've got some old footage of him, And then a few more came out a few years later. And then there was a chap called Mike Cataldo, ex-US Navy. He came out 28 years later and told his story. And then when Calvin told his story, it's how we found others, and others came out of the woodwork and so on. So there's around about 40 independent eyewitnesses in this book.
Wow. Yeah. Go right ahead. Would you mind holding up that book?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're lucky I haven't got it sellotaped to my forehead, Martin.
Beyond a
There
reasonable
you go.
doubt.
You've got it in stereo.
I know, and I like the little tabs you have in the book there. Those are great. Those are great.
You can tell the scientists here, can't you?
Yeah.
Me with nothing stuck in it, and Irene with all the tabs, knowing where to go to where idiot here has to flick through it if I try and find something, But
that's funny. I've got a question for you. I don't know who wants to answer this. Irina, maybe you, since you've had more detailed conversations. But this is what we think of when we think of what Charlie claims he saw. And I remember talking to Calvin. He didn't remember those appendages on the face like that. And these, for the audio listener, these pictures will be in the show notes. But what I'm asking is the witnesses that underwent the therapy, the hypnotherapy, how did they describe the beings?
Well, I think he said 3 of them were about 6 feet tall, but I don't remember anything about noses or ears on the ones he described, but maybe he just didn't get to it.
Yeah, it's one of the things we intend to clarify when the opportunity arises. It's same with the description of the object that Charlie and Calvin saw. Not so much as what it looked like, but the size of it. There was some discrepancies in that, and Calvin said, "Well, the light from this thing was so intense."
Yeah, I remember that.
It was hard to make out. We could make out the shape and what have you, but to get a really detailed look at it was difficult because we had to shield our eyes. It was like a welder's, arc welding. And so, yes, there are discrepancies in some of the accounts between them. However, I think that adds to the veracity of it, because if it were exactly the same, then you think it's like me and you, Martin, we're standing at the side of a road and a bus goes past.
Yeah.
You and I would say it was a green bus, I'd say there were 15 people on it. You'd say there were 10, but we've both seen the same thing. It's just the way things work. And
I'm sorry, but as we go through, we're kind of running out of time here pretty soon. But as we go through and hear people, multiple witnesses speak, I know you can say the same thing. A lot of times people actually don't see the same thing. They'll be standing right next to each other and both having a different account, which seems to be almost the norm.
Yeah, well, we've got people again on the other side of the river saw the thing that night. Gentleman driving across the bridge that night saw it. People in and around the area saw it. And we put everything and anything we've accumulated in the book. And our argument is, we believe that beyond reasonable doubt, if we took this to court, we could prove something really extraordinary happened that night. Cannot of course, prove they were abducted by aliens. But that wasn't our original title for the book. I mean, I think I was watching a courtroom drama one night, and I heard that phrase, and I emailed Irina and said, what? But there is more information out there. And the reason we know this, Martin, is because just in August, a lady by the name of Chelsea Norton Prince, who runs the Ocean Springs Historical Society, contacted us. She had an interest in the case, and a member of their society had 2 boxes of letters that once belonged to Charles Hickson.
Oh,
all in
that's
plastic
awesome.
containers. Yeah, her mum and dad had bought Charlie's house when he died in 2011. And these and other stuff were part of it. She gave some of the other stuff away some years back, but she still had this. And Chelsea, God bless her, has digitized all of this. And I have it all here on a thumb drive. And while there's no smoking guns, there's interesting little bits and pieces. There's sketches of the UFO by Charlie himself in pencil, you know.
That's wonderful.
Never published. There is a letter. Yeah, Irina's going to hold up the UFO.
All right.
Got it up. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Okay, kind of turn it a little bit. There you go. And are you able to send me a picture of that so I can put it in the show notes for the audio people, please?
Yeah. And of course, there's actually a letter in it from a NASA physicist. And he says, I asked NASA to investigate this case when it happened in 1973. And they declined. They were not interested.
Sure.
So we've written a small piece about that. And that's just made the newspapers today because of the NASA hearings just a few days ago, of course.
Yeah.
Which told us nothing that we didn't already know. But that's besides the point, you know?
Yeah.
So I checked this gentleman out. He was a genuine NASA physicist, and they turned it down. They missed the boat.
Wow.
You know?
Wow. Now we have to kind of wrap the show, but real quickly, this is Calvin Parker, the great old Calvin Parker. I will certainly miss him, but I want you to take note of the hat. And Philip, if you would, hang on just a second here. There you go. That's the hat. The hat. Now, tell the story. I know we're running out of time, but that's a signed hat from Calvin. But I'll just tell it real quickly because we are out of time. And that is Calvin did a talk somewhere, and someone came up and offered him $200 for the hat, and he laughed and he said, "You can buy this hat down the road for $20." And he said, "Yeah, but it's not your hat."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and I wouldn't part with it for anything, Martin.
That's right. We will never see that on eBay. Thank you all so much. It's been a real pleasure. And we will definitely miss the great one and only Calvin Parker.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care, both of you. All right. All right. So we'll be back next week with Jim Quirk. Jim Quirk is a guy that started podcasting on UFOs. He has a great sense of humor. And he really does look for a lot of the facts he has a lot of interest in this topic. So that's when we'll be back. Thank you all. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.